In narrative design, structural balance dictates that a protagonist must undergo an arc of profound transformation. However, the greatest barrier to that transformation is often the presence of an omnipotent, flawless mentor. When a character archetype achieves functional perfection, whether through sheer psychological charisma, absolutely tactical precision, or unyielding moral certainty, they inadvertently paralyze the narrative ecosystem around them. Perfection in a secondary protagonist is a structural dead end. When analyzing these figures through a director's lens, their termination is revealed not as an arbitrary plot drama, but as a deliberate architectural extraction. We can define this systematic phenomenon through what we call the Togata Framework, a meta-textual perspective derived from the meta-narrative philosophy in Tatsuki Fujimoto's Firepunch. It posits that a story's structural integrity relies heavily on the clean final act. Characters who embody the peak of an ideal must be removed to dissolve the safety nets, preventing primary character evolution. Today we'll deconstruct three distinct subtypes of this tragic architecture: the volatile spark, the teleological burden, and the axiological shield. Our first category is the archetype of the volatile spark, manifested through the charismatic monopolization of agency. Kamina from Gurrenlagann serves as the definite case study. Within the narrative initial parameters, humanity exists in a state of psychological stagnation, pinned underground by systematic defeatism. Kamina's function is purely destructive. He does not offer long-term structural solutions. He acts as an ideological wrecking ball driven by irrational optimism. However, from a structural standpoint, this degree of charisma introduces a critical narrative defect: the complete erosion of the protagonist's autonomy. As long as Kamina IO copies the frame, Simon's character progression remains mathematically impossible. He's trapped in a permanent state of secondary emulation, looking exclusively at the mentor's back. The director must utilize a catalytic demise to forcibly transfer agency. Kamina's execution is a calculated extraction. By converting Kamina from a living agent into a static ideological symbol, evidenced by the systematic shift from believe in the me to believe in the you, the narrative forces Simon to absorb the vacant structural space, converting external motivation into an internal character engine. While the spark operates on raw emotion, our second archetype operates on pure Utilitarian calculus. This is the teleological burden, optimized by Commander Erwin Smith of Attack on Titan. Erwin represents tactical perfection within a closed system. His leadership relies on the cold monetization of human life as a currency to purchase micro advancements for humanity. He functions as a human machine, completely compartmentalizing psychological trauma to maintain institutional efficiency. The narrative crisis emerges from Erwin's hidden underlying teleology, his personal desire to validate his father's historical hypothesis. The absolute peak of Erwin's narrative utility occurs when his subjective desires come into direct conflict with his objective utility. In the Shogun Shina arc, the system demands that only a flawless utilitarian could override. To secure a victory, Erwin must execute a suicide charge, purposely destroying his own lifelong pursuit of truth. His removal is a narrative necessity for a world-building expansion. Erwin's calculated, ruthless style of leadership was built exclusively for a micro-level conflict against an existential threat. Is structurally incompatible with the highly Newton's morality comprised geopolitical terrain waiting across the sea. His death preserves his tactical legacy while clearing the path for a new, more adaptable regime. Our third subtype is the axiological shield, a structure built entirely on an absolute moral immutability. Korojuro Rengoku from Demonslayer operates as the human realization of the unshakable ethical framework. His core directive is absolute. The naturally empowered must conciliate the structural vulnerable. During the Mugen train sequence, Rengoku functions as a literal systematic shield, maintaining a zero casualty metric across 200 civilians. He represents the zenith of human defense capability within the narrative established power scaling. The narrative confrontation between Rengoku and Akaza is fundamentally an ideological stress test. Akaza offers the alternative of demon biological permanence, highlighting the inevitable decay of the human frame. Rengoku's rejection is a philosophical defense of transience. He argues that human value is derived directly from its temporal limitations. Rengoku's death is required to establish the idealized benchmark. Had he survived, the primary trio of Tanjiro, Insoku, and Dentsu would have remained under an absolutely protective canopy, rendering their personal growth inert. By dying at his absolute operational peak without compromising his ethical framework, he establishes an absolute standard of performance that the younger generation must actively evolve to replicate. When we synthesize these three archetypes under the lens of narrative engineering, the broader objective becomes distinct. This brings us back to the core tenet of the Togata Framework. In classic dramatic composition, a character who survives their narrative peak is subject to character regression or thematic dilution. They risk becoming a narrative redundancy. The deaths of Kamina, Erwin, and Rengoku are not instances of narrative failure, they are instances of structural preservation. By terminating these figures at the absolute zenith of their respective domains, the writer achieves a state of ideological transmutation. These leaders are permanently stripped of their fragile physical vulnerabilities and reconstructed as immortal narrative concepts. They cease to be characters navigating an environment and instead become the foundational infrastructure of the world itself. They become the internal fuel, the structural paving stones, and the absolute ethical benchmarks against which all future protagonists are measured. Their destruction is complete, devastating, and structurally flawless. If this kind of structural breakdown is useful to how you think about story architecture, subscribe for more of this analysis. Drop your own take below. Which extraction hit hardest?